We're going to go to our final speaker today, who is Amparo Domingo. She's from Spain. She is the country contact for WDI in Spain. She is the co-host or the host of this webinar quite often. And she is also an expert on gender identity ideology, asked to speak in all over Spain and sort of becoming recognized as probably the best expert in Spain. So we're really lucky to have Amparo talking about Spain is on fire. There's a rapid attempt to change laws very quickly in Spain. And so she's going to give us an update on that. So thank you so much, Amparo. Thank you for coming on in the middle of your other meeting. Over to you.
The situation in Spain is getting increasingly dire. And as I have told you in previous updates, our government is working very hard to implement self-ID in Spain. There is a bill of law now introduced in our parliament that is a proposal arising from the Equalities Ministry, but now officially endorsed by the whole cabinet and sent to Congress to be processed. The whole name of this bill is Bill for the Real and Effective Equality of Trans People and for the Guarantee of the Rights of LGBT People. But informally, it is commonly referred to as the trans law by everyone. Journalists, even the politicians refer to the trans law for this bill. The proposed text includes all three axes that in other jurisdictions appear in different legal texts. That is, self-ID from 14 years old on. 14 to 16 years old have to be assisted by their legal guardians, and from 16 years old, everyone on their own, no questions asked whatsoever. The proposal doesn't exclude anyone, not even people with declared mental illnesses like schizophrenia or a criminal history. There's also a ban on so-called conversion therapy, which would include gender identity as a protected category against this alleged conversion, therefore putting in the line of fire all psychotherapists currently working with people who experience distress about their body, including confused teenage girls who think they're boys. And also there's criminalization of dissent, introducing fines for those who disagree with the woke approach, up to 150,000 euros. This bill doesn't modify our criminal code, but restricts its scope to the administrative level, which is good on the one hand, but a very dangerous thing on the other. So it is true that this bill, if passed, that they cannot send people to prison, but in fact, these fines could be applied to people even if the courts were to find that, according to Spanish law, these people were not committing a crime. So this is certainly a kind of thought police being proposed in Spain. So this is a proposal. I think you already knew about this because I told you in previous occasions, but now the news are that the proposal was formally introduced in Congress in early September, which we expected according to the agenda of the government and the parliament. But we had a very unpleasant surprise along the way. The government sent two requests to the Bureau of the House in relation to this bill. One request we knew, the second we didn't. The request we knew was that they wanted to process this bill as an urgent matter. The Bureau granted this request, so now, according to the standing orders of the House, all processing periods for this bill will be halved. Every process, everything that has to be done, now the period is going to be cut in half. Like, for instance, if they have 2 weeks to issue a certain report, now it's going to be just 1 week. So every step of the way, all periods are going to be cut in half. For any given bill to be processed as an urgent matter, there have to be solid grounds for that request, but those given by the government were not solid at all. The first reason they gave to support the claim of urgency is that they said that LGBTI people felt they were being discriminated against in Spain. So this new bill was absolutely necessary because of that feeling that the LGBTI collective had. So both the government and the Bureau of the House seem to forget that on June 30th, just 3 months ago, the Congress in Spain passed a law against discrimination called law on equal treatment and non-discrimination, which includes LGBTI people among any other group based on race, origin, anything. Everyone is included there. So we have already a law in force in Spain that regulates how to protect vulnerable people. So because of this new bill, just 3 months old, we think all provisions related to LGBTI discrimination in the current bill in the trans law are redundant with this legislation in force, but no one seems to care about this. The second reason they gave to support the claim of urgency, they said that was because Spain had to remove the criteria of pathologization that informs our current law that was passed on 2007. And they said this was in accordance to the new guidelines from the World Health Organization. They are, of course, referring to the new edition of the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD, the 11th edition, which supposedly depathologize gender identities by removing gender dysphoria from the classification of diseases. But we feminists, we know that gender dysphoria is not listed as a disease at the ICD because it has been renamed, not removed from the classification. It is now listed as gender incongruence, and it has been relocated from mental health to the sexual health section. And it is precisely because it hasn't disappeared from the ICD that the government pretends to fund many procedures like surgeries, hormone treatments from the public purse at the public health system. That is, had the gender incongruence, had it been removed actually from the ICD, all those medical procedures would be considered completely voluntary, exactly like cosmetic surgery, so they couldn't be funded by the state. That way, it is impossible for the government to pretend to be ignorant of the fact that gender incongruence, as it is called, it is still a diagnosis at the ICD. So their claim about depathologization is a complete lie on their side. Nevertheless, as I just said, the Bureau granted their request, so now the bill will be processed faster than usual. I mean, as I told you, it's twice as fast. The second request the government sent to the Bureau of the House is for the bill to be dealt only at the Equalities Committee. This we didn't know. And this is an ordinary delegation for usually non-important bills, maybe technical ones that in order to better organize everybody's time, they do not have to meet at the plenary for things that are just like admin or very like regulatory things that are, you don't expect a debate about maybe a technicality. So this bill, which is the complete opposite, should not be dealt under this procedure, because this bill could turn upside down all previous Spanish legislation. According to the standing orders of the House, all comments, amendments, everything will happen now only at the committee, without the final text being sent to the plenary of the Congress for a full debate as usual. And in the plenary, all the parties have representation. Not all parties are represented at the committee. The smallest parties are not represented at the committee. So now, because of this delegation granted by the Bureau, when the committee arrives at the final text, and if it is approved, it will go straight to our Senate, which is the upper house in Spain, for the second round of approvals before becoming an actual law. And this, of course, is being made to obscure the public debate, to prevent the public debate of the bill, and making more difficult for everyone to understand its aim and scope. There are 350 MPs in our Congress, and only 60 of them belong to the Equalities Committee. As I said, not all political parties have representation in the committee. The smallest ones, they won't have the opportunity to give their opinion on the matter. So both requests from the government to the Bureau combined might create a true fast track for the parliamentary process of this bill, contrary to what happens in other complex issues where lengthy debates delay the process, but because there's the need and chance to discuss all relevant details. So feminists, I personally, we think we are being robbed of our rights and of the idea of democracy. This feels really, to me, it feels like a coup without the shootings. This is not the only irregularity in the process of the trans law, because according to Spanish law, some consulting public bodies have to issue a report on the proposed text of any bill before it is sent to the parliament. Those reports are mandatory. Even if later the government, they have the right to choose whether to follow their advice or not. But the reports have to be written and sent to the government as a compulsory part of the procedure. Without the reports, the government cannot send the bill to Congress. Well, there was one report missing from the Prosecution Council. It didn't arrive, but the government sent the bill anyway to Parliament. Some days ago, this report was finally issued, and it was positive for the government's text, even though later on, newspapers published that the Prosecution Council is very, very divided about the support, especially with regards to the treatment of minors in this bill. So there's a lot of noise in the air. People are starting to talk about this. Some newspapers are mentioning this. The situation is not very clear. There's a lot of confusion because not everyone understands the processes that happen inside the Congress. I myself, I'm learning a lot, reading the standing orders of the House in order to better understand the procedure. And the sad thing is that Spanish society, because of this confusion, Spanish society at large is not aware really of the full scope of the conflict. Several feminist organizations have sent petitions to the president of the Equalities Committee, who happens to be, this is very interesting, happens to be our former Deputy Prime Minister, Carmen Calvo. She is the person in power. She has her role allows her to call in experts at the commission in order to testify before the Equalities Committee, to report on the consequences of the proposed legislation. Confluencia Movimiento Feminista and several other radical feminists have applied that, WDI Spain also. So we already have sent a request to be called as experts to appear in Congress before the committee. And we already have got a receipt from the Congress acknowledging our request. So at least it's there, it has been registered. We don't know what's going to happen next. It is going to be very interesting because Carmen Calvo very recently has declared very, very explicitly that she doesn't agree with the government's proposal at all. She's very critical of the idea of self-ID, even though she hasn't mentioned the other aspects of the bill, as I mentioned before, the ban on conversion therapy and the criminalization of dissent. She said last week to a live audience of several hundred women in a feminist seminar that happened in Valencia, and also on an interview for a conservative newspaper that was published this past Monday, that she is very critical. She had a remark that made it to the front page of the newspaper, and that was that the trans law will destroy our equalities legislation. So she's very clear about that. But now, as I said it's going to be interesting because we still have to see whether her loyalty to her party is more important for her than her feminist values, or the other way around. We don't know that. Right-wing parties have reacted negatively to the bill. The oldest and largest of the right-wing party, the Popular Party, has called for the removal of the proposal. They tabled amendments in full. So they do not want the proposal, the bill, at all. There's a far right-wing party, which are literally fascist, literally, it's called Vox. And they also tabled amendments in full. And the third right-wing party, which is a small neoliberal party. They are pro-surrogacy. They tabled partial amendments. The media are reacting depending on their political bias. Woke media are just crazy. They are not journalists, but activists, in fact. Left-wing media are complicit in the blocking of feminist voices, and right-wing media are publishing information about the matter, sometimes even quoting actual feminists. So the woke narrative that the radical feminists are in fact right-wing women could be seen as plausible for uninformed people. This week, Julia Otero, who is a very famous journalist, she works now in radio. She has been on TV some time ago, but now she's had a huge audience on her radio program. She questioned her audience whether we feminists were closer to the right-wing parties than to the government. That was the title for the program this week. That is, as we all know, but the audience in this webinar, we know that is superficially true, meaning that both right-wing parties and feminists are against self-ID and against children's medical transition. But some right-wing people might believe in the true trans narrative, which we completely disagree with. Plus, right-wing people are usually in favor of all sex stereotypes that are in fact the basis for the concept of transsexualism in the first place. So this approach doesn't help to shed light on the issue. This trans bill is the most pressing issue on our agenda, but they are, well, you might imagine this is the most pressing issue on our agenda, but there are other important issues happening at the same time, as Joe said, because the government wants also to reform the law on abortion rights for Spanish women. Their official reason for that is they want to restore some of the rights that were removed at the previous legislature when the Popular Party, the right-wing party I mentioned, eliminated the possibility for teenage girls of 16 and 17 years old to have an abortion without their parents' knowledge. But of course, they are taking this opportunity to include queer language, like trans people that can gestate. So that is now in the proposed text of the law on abortion rights for Spanish women. And this is interesting, same as with the trans trans law, they also abused their powers, establishing also an urgent procedure for the processing of this bill. And that started even at the draft stage of the bill some months ago. So not only they wanted to be dealt with as urgent in Congress, they already some months ago declared it was an urgent matter for the making of the draft. Spanish legislation establishes that in order to declare a draft of a bill to be urgent, there have to be solid grounds for that, and those reasons have to be published in the report that the government has to issue with the draft of the bill when it's open for public consultation, and that happened last May. WDI Spain, then we objected to the use of queer language and demanded that the text would only recognize women according to our sex, not any identity. And we also objected to the declaration of urgency because we couldn't find any information about what were the reasons for the urgency. So that was in May, but some weeks ago when the government approved the bill to send it to the parliament, so everything I'm telling you is happening in September, they also sent a new report about the steps taken up to that moment. And in that report, WDI Spain allegations were mentioned. In the report, they said, well, they were not going to uphold our demand of a sex-based language, but they acknowledged that they hadn't published the reasons for the urgent processing of the legal text, and they said that it was a mistake and they would correct that. A journalist for a conservative newspaper noticed this mention in the report and contacted us, so we are mentioned in her article in the conservative media this past week. There, it literally says that feminist organization Women's Declaration have doubts about the lawfulness for the procedure. So the situation is similar to other countries. We are being conflated with the right-wing parties or activists. And they are really trying to fast track queer legislation here in Spain. So that's why Joe suggested the title "Spain is on Fire." And as you see, the situation is very complicated. We keep fighting. We are still trying to stop this bill and prevent it from being an actual law. And for that, some rallies and events are being organized. Next week, 2 rallies are going to happen in Madrid on October 5th and October 8th. And more petitions are going to be sent to Parliament in the following days. We're going to keep fighting until the end. We won't submit. And that's all I have to say to you today.